One of the nicest parts about having a large family is when you get to visit them for the holidays. And in 2016, I was going to do just that. At the time, I had been living in Northern California and decided to go stay with my parents for the holidays at their cabin in Colorado. I was planning it as a huge surprise too, and originally I had intended on just showing up unannounced. But instead, I came up with an idea that I thought would be infinitely better. I was going to show up at the cabin a few days before them, so that when they showed up, I could have it decorated for them. It was going to be amazing. So I figured out that my parents were going to be showing up at the cabin on December 20th of that year, and decided to go there 2 days before them. But to make sure that I didn't accidentally spill the beans, I made sure not to talk to them at all after the 15th, to give myself some time to prepare. Now, if I had spoken to them, I would have found out that they had to cancel their flights to Colorado due to a blizzard that was set to hit on the 20th. But I had no clue, and on December 18th, I flew to Colorado and caught a ride to my parents' cabin, where I used the key that I had on my keychain to get in. The first night I just relaxed, but the entire next day I spent putting up the lights and setting up the living room to look nice for them when they showed up. But as the sun began to set, I noticed that it was starting to snow outside, and I immediately grew concerned. It only got worse from there. It was about 1 in the morning when I noticed the power went out around me, and I decided to give up on my surprise plan and called my parents to see if there was a generator. And as soon as they realized I was at the cabin, they freaked out. But not in the way that seemed like they were excited. They were immediately concerned and let me know that there was a really intense snowstorm heading my way. And when I told them that the power had gone out, they only worried more. You see, the driveway leading up to the cabins was a gravel path through the woods that spanned the length of about 2 football fields. In other words, with the snow piling up the way that it was, there was no way for me to get out. And to make matters worse, I didn't bring much food because I assumed my family would be bringing some. All I could do at that point was hope that the storm passed sooner than expected and I could get out of there. That wasn't the case though. It snowed for 5 days straight, and the service roads leading up to the mountain that I was on had apparently been shut down. My phone's battery was low, so I decided to turn it off for use in an emergency. And from that moment on, I spent most of my time reading anything that I could. I managed to keep the cabin warm using the wood that I had piled up the night that I got in, and I melted snow on the wood stove to make drinking water. But by the time the 4th day rolled around, I was starving. I hadn't had anything to eat in over 48 hours and was getting really desperate. I looked in the cabinets and ended up finding 3 cans of ravioli that had been in there for years, if not longer. At that point, I would have eaten anything though, so I didn't waste any time putting the can directly on the wood stove to begin heating up its contents. It only took me 10 minutes before realizing how bad of a decision I had made. In no time at all, I was keeled over, clenching my stomach in pain. I turned my phone on and called my parents to see if they thought it was serious. And after realizing the food that I had eaten was more than likely more than a decade old, they had me call the hospital, which transferred me over to poison control. That's when I learned how terrifying botulism was. According to the person I spoke to, if I didn't get help soon, there was a chance that my body would become deeply infected and I could ultimately die. They ended up sending a helicopter to airlift me to the hospital since the roads were still closed in the area around my cabin, and I'm glad they did. By the time they got there, which was only an hour after my call, I had developed a fever over 106 degrees and could feel an intense heat coursing through my body. I was hospitalized for 3 days afterward, 2 of which were spent simply monitoring my vitals and making sure that my organs hadn't been damaged.
Back in 2017, I worked as a delivery driver for Uber Eats to make some extra money on the side. It wasn't the best paying job, but it was something to help me get by my struggles as a growing adult. I was 25 years old, and I'm sure most of you know how life really sets in at that age. Anyway, I live in the suburbs of New York. Not the city, just the state, as I was never a city person, but lived near it. Throughout my life, I've always been more of a quiet person, which is why I really like the suburban areas. One night, I was doing some late night delivery orders to keep the income flowing when there had been an incoming weather report. The snow had been falling pretty hard and the winds were measuring well over 50 kilometers and that a blizzard was on its way. That being said, I still wanted to do a few more orders for the night. Luckily, I had received one order from someone on the other side of town. It wasn't too far, but this person barely met the delivery radius. I was annoyed because of the distance, but I realized it was another tip. I bit my lip and drove to the restaurant and to the given address. All the while, the falling snow began to come down fast and the winds were starting to pick up. On top of that, the snow on the sidewalks were already starting to pile up, so I knew I had to get there in time. I arrive at the destination, and there's this man standing outside of his terrace house wearing several layers of clothing. Just by looking at him, he did not seem like a pleasant type of man. It was one of those men that screamed stranger danger. He comes up to my car, and I proceed to hand him his food when he begins to ask for some money. I ask him what it was for, to which he then says that his car had been out of gas. Okay, so I wasn't sure why that was my problem, but being nice and not wanting to piss him off, I hand him a $10 bill and wished him luck. He looked down at the money and then looked back at me with a blank expression as if he wanted more. He then said that it wasn't enough and that I could at least do 50. I told him that was all I had, but that maybe someone else could help him. The look on his face that day is something that will never leave me. It was a look of hatred and anger, as if I were his sworn enemy. I then tell him to enjoy and drove off away from the building. Doing that, however, was probably the most stupidest decision of my life. I hear two loud bangs echo through the streets along with something hitting my back tire. It didn't take me long to realize that these bangs were actually gunshots. Suddenly my car swerves from left to right and the ice didn't make it any better. Eventually, I managed to get a hold of the wheel and drive back with my back tire making this awful noise. However, I was afraid of what might happen if I stopped my car in case he was following me somehow. Thankfully, I had gotten home safely just in time and didn't once look back. Police were called and I reported the incident to Uber, but nothing ever became of it. After all, this did happen in the Bronx, which isn't the safest place in the city. I guess I learned my lesson not to assume that everything I do is safe, when in reality, it isn't. It was the fall of 2015, and I just finished my first semester in college, meaning winter break would finally be upon me. I live in upstate New York, and around this time of year, it would become exceedingly cold in my area with temperatures dropping below the 30s. Growing up in the cold, I wasn't bothered by it and actually enjoyed it to a certain extent. One night, my mom had been out with a friend, leaving me to tend to the house alone. I didn't mind staying alone, as I like to think of myself as mature and responsible, and I could really use the quiet. Now, the house we lived in was located in the more rural side of my city. It wasn't like the country, but houses here were far apart and the nearest grocery store was about 9 miles. With nothing to do, I throw myself onto my couch and put on some Netflix to fall asleep to. So there I am, bored out of my mind, watching Orange is the New Black when the power goes out. Living in a cold area where the winds are strong, it wasn't uncommon for it to go out once in a while. With nothing to do at this point, I closed my eyes and tried to fall asleep until my parents came home. I probably slept on the couch for about a good 2 hours when I for some reason wake up. The power is still out, so I couldn't see anything in the room other than the faint glow from the moon. However, I started having this weird feeling in the room. You know that sensation you get when you can just feel someone's watching you? Yeah, I had that in spades. I sat bolt upright while letting my eyes adjust to the dark, and right then I could see the outline of something tall beside the couch. By some miracle, the power comes back on, and about 2 feet away is a man standing over me. He looked to be in his mid-30s, was very tall and lanky, wearing a torn white shirt and some cargo pants. The thing that made the situation 10 times creepier was the fact that parts of his clothes were covered in blood. My blood ran cold as he stared down at me with this menacing glare of utter shock. I say I stared at him for a good 10 seconds before he says something along the lines of, who are you? I say in an angry tone, who are you and what the hell are you doing inside of my house? He then went on to explain that he was driving when his car skidded across the road from the ice, crashing into a large tree, and he came to the nearest house looking for help. It didn't take me long to realize that the blood on his clothes was his. In the heat of the moment, I thought his story was bullshit, but I didn't want to be rude. I tell him that there was nothing I could do and that if he didn't leave, I would call the cops. He didn't respond to this and started walking around the living room looking for stuff. Needless to say, I called the police and explained the situation to the operator. They said that it could take a while for an officer to get here due to the extreme weather conditions. I'm 5'8", that weighed around 150 pounds, and this guy was massive, so I couldn't take him on even if I tried. All the while, he's going through cabinets, opening doors, and wouldn't listen to me when I told him to stop. I could only assume that he was on something and prayed the police would be here soon. Turns out, his so-called bullshit story turned out to be 100% true. 2 police officers came to my door 15 minutes later and told me that he was indeed in a car crash. I felt so bad for him, assuming he was an intruder when the guy was just wanting some help. Apparently, the impact of the crash shocked him to the point where he didn't know what he was doing, which explained him searching through my living room. Long story short, he was sent to a hospital and me nor my mom pressed any charges. My parents didn't let me stay home alone after that until a few years later. This is by far the most strangest incident I've ever come across in my 9 years of living in that house. Even though I felt sympathy for the man, this story still scares me till this day. I'm 22 now and I have moved past it. But there's still one question I have. How did he get inside of my house? The thing is, my parents always keep our doors locked.